Welcome to a new episode of Extraordinary. I'm your host, Jonathan Løw, and as always, we promise you extraordinary guests and down-to-earth conversations. Today's guest is Seth Godin. Seth Godin is an entrepreneur, speaker, and author of 21 books, including numerous #1 bestsellers. His latest book is named This Is Your Strategy. Thanks again, Seth, so much for taking the time to join Extraordinary.
It's a pleasure. Extraordinary is one of my favorite words because of the way the A and the O just sit right next to each other.
Exactly. I can already promise the viewers and the listeners we're going to come back to some word magic. But I'm gonna start off with your new book. This is Strategy. I've had the pleasure of reading some of it, not all of it. I don't even know if it's finished yet here when we are doing the recording. But
I finished it yesterday.
Wow, congratulations. Then I'm going to dive straight into it. The first thing that came to mind was, so I've run a tech company for the last 5 years, and we have our board, as you're supposed to have in a tech startup or growth company, and we have a very experienced chairman. And he always says to us as founders, listen, guys, I like your plan, but what's your strategy? And we were like, but we have a really good plan. But he's like, yeah, what's your strategy? So maybe can you enlighten me and all other entrepreneurs and others, like, what is then actually the difference? Because I never really figured it out. We kept showing him our plan.
So Michael Porter, the godfather of strategy, points out that strategic planning doesn't make a lot of sense because plans are things that managers have control over, that we like to have plans. I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do this. Strategy accepts the fact that there are external systems, external individuals, there are nodes in the world who have choices to make. So your plan isn't going to survive its encounter with the outside world. A strategy is informed by games and systems and time. That what we are doing is engaging in a world that has rules and boundaries and other players. And so our strategy is the choices that we are going to make over time to give other people the option to pick us. Why would they pick us? Why would they miss us if we are gone? And if you get a strategy right, the plans will take care of themselves over time. But if you get a plan right, it's not going to matter because the world is going to change.
Actually, think I finally understood it now. So thanks, that's a good start. Then straight into your use of words, which I love. So I'm just going to quote it. I'm not sure it's the exact quote from the book, but I've written down. So a part of our strategy, which we've now established, framework, is the principle that you can see the future as an unvisited city. A place that we can still see from the distance. I think those are some of the words. So my question will be then, how do we get the clearest and best view possible?
So when we think about playing a game of poker or any other kind of cards, there are 52 cards in the deck. And if you get an ace, you can say, well, I was lucky. Someone needs to get the ace. 1 out of 13 cards is an ace. You know something about the deck before you play the game. You don't know exactly what card you're going to get, but you know what the deck's layout is. Well, the future is a little bit like that. We have inklings and probabilities. We have understandings of how the systems could fall out, but we can't know for sure. And this is a conflict because most organizations are built on certainty and power. And the future gives us neither of those things. So just like, if I'm going to get on a plane to Copenhagen, what are the chances that when I land, the first person I meet is going to speak Danish? Well, probably pretty high. What are the chances that they will speak Italian? Lower than that. But if I meet someone who speaks Italian, I shouldn't be stunned because there are some Italian people wandering around Copenhagen. So we need to understand, how is the deck stacked? What is the likelihood that certain things are going to happen? And how will we respond or react when it doesn't happen that the most likely thing occurs? So what we get to do, if we're going to choose to build a strategy, is to find the assets and then bring what we need with us to the future, so that when the future arrives, we're more ready for it.
You could have written a book with your word talent about almost anything. And I mean, you've written a lot about marketing and communication. And then I was wondering, there are, thousands of books about strategies and strategy. Why did you then think, I'm going to spend my important time and life on another book? Why does the world need this strategy now?
All right, well, maybe I'm just uninformed, but I can't find any good books about strategy. I think there are lots of good books on tactics. There are lots of good books on plans. There are some books for generals or MBAs about strategy. But, I help people who are friends of mine with their future often. And what I find over and over again is they think they have a marketing problem, but they actually have a strategy problem. And I didn't have a book to hand them. So now I do.
And I started reading it. And one of the first things that popped into my head was reading it as a serial entrepreneur. One of the things that I have struggled with before was you start building a company, then to show your investors and everyone else that this could be a success, you start getting customers and they start paying you, so you want to keep them. And then at some point you might realize, damn, these customers are either hard to keep, they're too expensive to acquire, or they're too difficult in support, so they're not really a good business. But you kind of have to stay with them unless you do this pivot, which is also really hard work. And then you write a lot about that you have to, choose the right customers. And I thought, on one hand, wow, I really like that phrase. And then on another hand, as an entrepreneur, I've experienced so many times that I don't have the privilege, at least I thought, of choosing them. So what would your idea be if we envision a startup? Can you really choose your customers from the beginning? Will they be out there, or is it something you can do once you've started the company, you've grown, and then you have the resources to say, okay, we're going in the wrong direction here, let's make a new strategy, and let's try to, on the longer run, attract some different customers because they have a better, lifetime value for us?
So there's a lot to cover here. Steve Blank calls this idea customer traction. Every single person who starts a project is choosing their customers before they start. They might not realize they are. So if you want to get married and you go on Tinder, you just picked the kind of person that you might be dating and the way they're going to approach dating. If, on the other hand, you go to the local tabernacle and join the youth group, you've picked a different customer for your quest. If you open a small retail shop, well, you already decided based on where you put the shop, who's going to be walking by. You are already choosing your customer. And what entrepreneurs often fall into the trap of doing is picking easy and convenient customers. And when they do that, then they're sort of surprised when those people aren't the customers they were hoping for. Well, there's the mismatch. That's strategy, right? When you choose your customers, you choose your future. And it's naive and a little arrogant to say, I want to do the easy and convenient thing, but I want to get the customers that sign up for things that aren't easy and aren't convenient. Well, you can't have both.
And I think for many entrepreneurs, it's so true. And then I know so many entrepreneurs who are, at least here in Scandinavia, in this, also in the funding game. So you have to prove your model early on. So you're desperate to get some kind of customers and traction to prove this. And then, in my old company, I had an investor called David Heinemeier Hansen, and David created this Ruby on Rails and
right.
Basecamp, and he was always like, guys, you have to choose the bootstrapping way. I know it's slower, I know it's harder, but then you're still in control. Is that also kind of like a discussion around strategy?
Yeah, so I've known David for a long time, and he has something profound to say here. That as soon as you decided who's funding you, you've made a choice about your future. If the people who are funding you are pushing you to get the wrong customers, well, you picked the wrong people to fund you. And what David did was he said, we're going to write a programming language and do it in public so that we can get the people who will be Basecamp's first customers. Basecamp's first customers were not convenient or easy to get. They were simply the right customers to get. And the people who took shortcuts and got the people who like are on product hunt and, the first 100 people who will send you $10, that's not necessarily what's going to build the entity you seek to build. So it's all the way down, turtles all the way down. It's all a strategy choice. Pick your customers, pick your funders, pick your competitors, and you have picked your future.
Do you think strategy is also, again, I'm talking from my own experience, but also talking to so many other entrepreneurs and company leaders, is it also a question of patience? Because like most, at least startups are very impatient. And when you are in a state of impatience, you do the plans and then you execute on them. And then you kind of think, well, the strategy, I have some idea, but we don't even have time to write it down. Maybe that's like one of the major pitfalls that you're doing.
I'm not sure I would use the word patience. I think I might use the word fear. We don't want to be on the hook by naming a very specific group of people, by being very clear. It doesn't take time to do that. It takes 5 minutes. So this isn't about patience. This is about guts. To say, you know what? The eyeglasses we're going to make are going to be the most expensive eyeglasses sold at the most expensive stores because that's the customer we want. Say that out loud. Now you're going to have to hustle and rush to get there, but at least you're going in the right direction.
And now you mentioned Steve Blank. So are you still, if we are to go like down into the material of stuff, so first step, creating a clear strategy, as clear as it can be in the beginning. And then second one, if you're doing like a lean startup approach, you will quickly go out and test if you can get traction. What if you then realize that you can't and parts of your strategy were wrong? How quickly should you conclude that? Because to me, like a strategy sounds more like a more fundamental thing that you can't just throw it away just because you do a quick like lean startup discovery. You have to be, that was the word, more patient.
Right. Okay, that's a great way to think about this. The idea, when I ran the podcasting fellowship, we said, who is the best guest you could ever get? What's the guest that if you got that person, you would have succeeded? Okay, you want to get Michelle Obama. Who would be the guest before that would make it obvious that Michelle wanted to say yes? Who would be the guest before that and the guest before that? And go back 10 guests until it's your sister-in-law, right? So now what we're looking for traction is not, oh, I mailed a letter to Michelle and she opened it. Traction is, after I did the podcast with my sister-in-law, was it straightforward to get the second and then the third and then the fourth? Where are the steps? And so, when I was starting in the book business, traction would be, has any publisher in New York published any book I've ever written? Because once I have one of those books from a little publisher with a little advance, I can bring it to another publisher and I can, right? Whereas if you say, if I don't win the Pulitzer Prize, this doesn't work, there's no steps there. You're just leaping. And so, yes, it's entirely possible the world has changed and your strategy is no longer valid. We need to throw that out, ignoring sunk costs. But first, we have to find a way to test our traction, to say, if I can please this person, it's more likely that they will tell that person. And if you can't get any traction at all, then either your strategy is too audacious or your stuff isn't good enough.
So obviously, since, well, you finished the book, but I haven't read the entire book. So I'm also going to ask questions where I don't know if it's actually part of the book.
This is great.
Obviously, like we all know the Peter Drucker quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast and so on. So, so one person might ask, so why haven't you written a book called This is Culture? Isn't strategy only valuable if you can actually turn it into culture? Are you like looking into this aspect, or is this 100% about strategy and people should read another Seth Godin book or another book to understand how to then transform this amazing strategy into everyday life?
Okay, so my last book was about culture, The Song of Significance.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't want to do too much. Yeah.
In this book, I argue that culture is invented by systems to defend themselves. So if we think about this, systems don't have an enforcement mechanism. For example, I write about the fact that my dentist cannot change the way he practices dentistry. And the reason is, if he's going to hire a dental hygienist, they have a way of talking and a way of doing their job. He's going to get dental tools. If he's going to get dental insurance, there's an entire system around being a dentist. He can't change it. But that system is something we call culture. What are things like around here? People like us do things like this. So if I'm building an organization and I have a strategy, I need to erect a culture around the strategy. So I don't have to enumerate the strategy all the time. I can simply enforce the culture. So the strategy of the Nordstrom's department store is to get high margin, repeated sales from upper income individuals who have options about where they shop. The tactic is to offer extraordinary customer service. The culture, therefore, is we will celebrate people who go out of their way to do extraordinary customer service. That shorthand is easy for people in the organization to learn, and it created a 50-year run of Nordstrom succeeding.
How has the process been with this book? So now when you're writing like this, do you, so you said you work like strategically already with companies. So are you using them as case stories to validate this is strategy, or how do you go about concluding that this is, this is the way to go? Not saying that you're writing a Bible about strategy, but still, it's founded in all of your years' experience. But how else do you get inspired to essentially write a book that can help many others with their strategy work?
Well, I love the word pedagogy. We don't talk about it enough. It is the science of teaching. How do people learn things? So I don't know about school where you grew up, but where I grew up in high school, first they teach biology, then they teach chemistry. Why do they do it in that order? Because there is no biology and chemistry class, but there's plenty of chemistry and biology class. So why do they do it biology first? The answer is because we discovered biology 1,000 years before we discovered chemistry. So that was the first thing people discovered and learned. And it's not useful to have it all in a prescribed order. So many people who want to write a nonfiction book say, I need to describe a foundation and then an orderly approach from the beginning to the end. I don't think that's how people learn things. And I know that's not how my brain works. So instead, what I do when I'm writing a book like this is I imagine I'm talking to someone like you, Jonathan, and I say to myself, where is the weak spot in the argument I'm trying to make? Let me address that one. Oh, okay. Now I can go over here and address that one. Now I'll go over here and address that one. So the book is in no order in particular, but it layers and layers and layers. And then I add stories. So I had stories about people I met 40 years ago who built successful things, and a guy who breeds ball python snakes who I've never met. But when I see a story in the world that I think will put substance to what I'm trying to teach, that will sit with people, that becomes the next brick in the wall. And once I've made it 2/3 of the way through, I then go back and I take away gratuitous stories that I love deeply, but aren't needed to make the argument. And then I go through again and I say, all right, it's leaner now, but what else needs to come here? And then that wraps the thing up. So I have a particular style of writing. It is not for everybody, but I have found that if I layer these things on and it sounds like I'm talking to you, that works for a lot of people.
I mean, I love stories. We all love stories because, I mean, that's essentially how we understand the world. But it also resonates even back to, I spent a couple of years at university. I never finished, but I studied literature and philosophy. And then when I look back 25 years from now, thinking, so how have I actually implemented this philosophy and literature in a business world? I tend to think about, what did we actually learn? We learned, I've called it for myself like simplexity. We learned to take complex things and make them simple. And it didn't really matter whether it was, world literature or it was Greek philosophers. And I also remember there was something in your book here where you talk about this importance of the simplicity, but then you add the lightness, I think was the wording, which I really loved in that context. Can you put a few words on what do you mean with, simplicity and then add some lightness, if I remember the quote correctly?
Yeah, the quote is from Colin Chapman, the guy who started Lotus race cars. And it's find simplicity, then add lightness. And what that means is that a useful strategy should be easy to describe and difficult to stick with. A useful strategy is something where we have removed the extraneous supports that just made us comfortable, and we can just point to it. And because it's light, because we haven't needed to build buildings around it, we can shift if we need to. And there is something to be said for building a battleship. Battleships are neither simple nor light, but battleships can only do one thing. And if we're building a vibrant organization that's dealing with the future, a battleship might not be the way we want to go.
Is that also why you distinguish, I remember you distinguish between a strategy as a map and a compass? That's also to get in the dynamics, or can you also explain that again? Now I have the benefit of having read some of this strategy.
Right.
When this goes out, it's just out there on the bookshelves and online. So difference between
right.
map and compass.
When you were talking about simplicity, you hinted at something, which is the map is not the territory. That literature is the act of reading tens of thousands of words and boiling it down to a map of what you read. Because otherwise we might as well just read every book. Understanding the map of the thing requires insight. But a map has challenges, which is it's not resilient. If the world changes, your map is out of date. If your needs change, your map is the wrong region. A compass, on the other hand, a compass always points north. So the job of the entrepreneur is to begin by figuring out which direction is north. And then building a sketch of a map so your team has an idea of where to go. If it turns out that your sketch is wrong, you can draw a new map without getting a new compass. And that idea, if I think about organizations that have lost their way, organizations that are just stuck being bureaucracies, is because someone in the organization lost the compass and they're just busy doing the tasks.
I love the metaphors. Also because I'm a language guy, but also because, we live by metaphors. It's how we also comprehend the world. And that's why I want to get into, you mentioned, which again is a way of using metaphors and language. You mentioned 4 threads that are sort of woven together. And just again, to make sure I have them right, there's time, there's games, there's empathy, and then there is systems that you've already talked a bit about. Can you elaborate these threads and then how they are woven together and how we can maybe,
right.
become even better at working with them?
Sure. So I'm enunciating it slightly differently. Threads, not threats. They are threads in that we are
That was
weaving.
my Danish pronunciation of the word. Good that you clarify it.
I love your Danish. And having seen all 10 seasons of Seaside Hotel, it is lovely to hear the accent. Okay, so let's begin with empathy. Empathy says, it's not up to you if someone buys what you sell. It's not up to you if someone signs up for what you do. It's up to them. So I don't care if it's important to you. I don't care if the funders need it to happen. I don't care if you're on a deadline. What's in it for me? This idea that each node in a system we seek to address is going to make a choice and that we have to give them agency is hard for a lot of people who are trying to make change happen. The second one, which we already talked about a couple of times, is systems. Systems are anything that happens when human beings come together to do something more than once. And the way that I like to think about systems is the solar system. That's the most famous system of all. The planets rotate around the sun. Why? Because of gravity. Gravity is invisible. Gravity is unseen, but it is resilient and it exerts a force. So it doesn't matter if the Earth feels like going over to Alpha Centauri, it's still going to rotate around the sun. And so where are the gravitational fields that impact the people in the systems you seek to change? The third one is games. And games are not board games. Games are any system engagement, any engagement with the system where there are boundaries and rules and winners and losers, where we can imagine that we're going to move a piece and somebody else is going to move a piece. By calling them games, we get two advantages. One, game theory is well tested and we know a lot about it, so you can read up and learn about how to get better at playing a game. And second, because we associate it still with kids, if you lose this round of a game, it's not fatal. You get to play again tomorrow. And so we get to say, oh, if I make this move and do a TEDx talk, that TEDx talk might get in front of this person who could share it with that person, and that person might decide to hire me to give a talk. If they hired me to give a talk, I might be able to talk about my new startup, blah, blah, blah. That's a game, right? There are all these moves. It's not that different than chess. And then the fourth one is time. And time is the hardest one for people to understand. That's why people challenge Darwin's evolution, because they can't see a dinosaur turning into a chicken, so they pretend it never happened. And when we start drawing graphs, like everything from the Rogers adoption life cycle to crossing the chasm to the Gartner hype cycle, all of the graphs that are all over conversations about this, what people forget is that the x-axis is time. That it is not a snapshot. It is over time. This is what's going to happen. So I ask, where are we right now? Right? Your company has 3 clients right now. You say you want 3,000. Show me the graph of how you get from 3 to 3,000. That's over time. Time is either our friend or our enemy. If you're a gardener, when you plant your seeds, you don't come in and say to your spouse, I failed because nothing grew. Well, yeah, but you planted them this morning. The question is, did you plant them with the future in mind? Or did you just selfishly plant them where they would be easy to plant?
How is time related to timing? Because again, to mention an example, so I've built 5 companies. 4 of them have been relatively successful, not sitting here as Bezos or Musk, but they have done okay. But then the 5th one, which was the one where David Heinemeier invested, is the only one that I had to take to bankruptcy. And one of the things I talked to David about was, we launched it 6 years ago, and it was in the space of AI, but we just used AI to make a search engine for photos, basically, like to make it simple. And then 2 years ago, generative AI exploded, and David says, well, we couldn't have predicted this. Like, then we would also be able to win the lottery. But then again, I still look back and think, there were some trends, there were some waves that people were starting to ride on. Maybe if I had lived in Silicon Valley and not in small Denmark, I would have heard more about OpenAI and Sam Altman and all of those, the visionaries. And maybe we could have predicted this wave, and we've been riding on it instead of like now, like going into a deep ocean and never going back. How do we work with this thing, which I have at least learned in my life has been crucial almost in every startup and company I talked to, which was the timing part, which is so hard,
Well, I have so many things I want to disagree with you about. The first one is, I am pretty sure you are happier than Musk or Bezos. So they didn't win anything that you don't have. The second thing is that 5 out of 6 is an unbelievable track record. And or 4 out of 5 or whatever the ratio is, I would be leaning hard into the things that worked, learning from the one that didn't, but not highlighting the one that didn't. I have failed way more than you, and I'm super proud of all of those failures. To have a track record like that is extraordinary. But your question was about
that strong, because they were just not bankrupt. They were not like, unicorns, but thanks anyway.
That's all good. Timing is something that's easy to describe after the fact. And I think it might be another word for good luck. And you didn't get good luck. You could have had good luck, but you didn't. When I sold my company to Yahoo, if I had waited 6 more months, I probably would have made 10 times as much money. But after the fact, you make the decision based on the data that you have in front of you. It was, when I studied AI at Stanford in 1983, I would have told you that it was going to happen probably in the next 5 years. I was wrong by decades and decades, right? This is not something that any entrepreneur should take credit for or take blame for. That we are always looking at how the future is unfolding. We are always looking at the trends and the forces. But timing, I think it's just called luck.
So where do I put this? If I want to build a company again, if I talk to some inspiring people in Denmark, and we are proud of companies like Lego or Novo, because they're also very important part of, not because the people got rich, but because we wouldn't have a welfare system if they weren't created. So we're very thoughtful about how do we build new companies like this so we also have a welfare system.
Lego was founded with 10 founding principles about what made good play. And they lived with those principles until they were days away from going bankrupt. And the only thing that saved the company was walking away from what they stood for and making kits and models instead of making a play toy that had many uses. They basically stood for creativity, and then they didn't. And so I'm very proud of how Lego has contributed to kids, to our culture, to your country. But I don't think you can say, they got it right on the first day. How do I get it right on the first day? What they did was they had the guts to say the culture and the system in the outside world has changed. Despite our best efforts, we can either go out of business or we can work with that new system. And that's what they did. So the punchline of the book is the best way to start a project is not to get your timing right or to get the trends right. It's to find the smallest viable audience of people who have a problem you can solve, earn traction from them in a way that gets them, because of the network effect, to bring along others. So to build a company for the ages that has an enormous amount of revenue and employees, and et cetera, is not find a giant problem and solve it. What we need is big problems to be solved with small projects. Tiny little things that gain traction that then become a movement where the network effect moves things forward. And the number of problems like that is enormous. So I give you a tech example. Until very recently, the most common, most used form of digital currency in the world was actually in Kenya. And where it came from is a company called Safaricom. They there's a phone company in Kenya, and many of the people who use digital phones in places that aren't particularly economically privileged don't sign up for a monthly account where the money comes out of their credit card and they don't have to pay attention to it. They actually buy topping up points on their phone so that they have enough for 2 or 3 days to make some more calls. Well, before Safaricom figured this out, if you had a relative across the country, like a grandmother, and you wanted to send her some money because you worked in Nairobi, this is true. I've talked to people who did this. You would go to the bus station with money in an envelope and her name written on it. And you would say, is anyone going to my village? And someone who's going to your village would take this envelope and bring it to your grandmother without opening it. This was how money was transferred. And then what happened was the phone company started building kiosks around the country because they needed a way that people could go and top up their phone because they needed a way to transact. So even though there's, where I live, you don't ever go talk to the person from AT&T. It's all digital. There you went and you gave them 5 Kenyan shillings and you could top off your phone. Okay, so far so good. But then they added one last component. And the last component was if you had a little bit extra in your phone, you could send some of your phone credits to your friend by phone. That's all they did, was make it so that you could help top off somebody else's phone. But once that was in place, people started figuring out that if they were at the market and wanted to buy some cassava, they could just send their top off credits to the far, and it became a nationwide currency. And so when we think about what would be the business plan that you would present for building the world's most popular digital currency, it probably would not involve cell phones and farmers markets in Kenya. But it worked because they had traction. It worked because they understood games, they understood systems, they had empathy for the people they were working with, and they had flexibility in the way they created value for people. So this is not a marketing conversation, it's a strategy conversation. And I rarely hear entrepreneurs talk this way. What I hear them say is, if we can get some good Google SEO, we'll get some clicks. And if we get some clicks, we can convert some people and then we'll make some money.
So it's related in some aspects or respects to the tribes that you described so inspiring in previous books, which I also really work with. That I don't know if I could call it a theory. For me, it was more like a mindset and a method. But I guess the layer that would then be very important to put on top of that is then again, like choosing the right customers would also be choosing the right tribe members, right? Because you can also
the same thing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So I knew when I started in book publishing, I couldn't self-publish because the system wouldn't permit me to do that. And I discovered over time, there were, 400 editors who would accept a submission from me, but only 7 of them were the right ones for me because they were looking for what I had to sell, right? And so I didn't race to a bottom. I raced to a place where I could find traction and where it could be repeated. And I didn't see this until someone else in the industry pointed it out to me, that I was wasting everybody's time running around just hoping someone would pick me instead of me choosing who I wanted to work with.
That makes so much sense. Seth, time is flying. You're an extremely busy guy, so we only have time for one last question. And now also probably because of my questions, which have been very startup related, entrepreneurial. I know you are very entrepreneurial mind too. Then I thought, okay, there will be a lot of people listening who are because that's where the majority work. They work in more like established organizations or companies. And they might get inspired to think about, so we have, maybe they don't, if not, they're not like top executive, maybe they don't even know the strategy. But if they are like in the management, they will think, okay, we have a strategy. How would you navigate to come to the point where you think maybe we need to revisit that strategy? Maybe like, because many times you hear, well, people do it probably when the company is starting to fail, but that is obviously too late. When would you encourage people to both read this strategy, but also if you're a more established company, start revisiting your strategy?
Okay, so there are two parts of the question. I'll answer the first part first, which is the book isn't about only what startup CEOs need to do when they have a clean sheet of paper. You need a strategy to get out of a parking ticket. You need a strategy to get into a famous college or decide if you want to go to a famous college. You need a strategy to get a raise from your boss. You need a strategy to get the regional sales force to act differently. These are all areas where we seek to make a change happen. We have assets, we have time, we have a goal. How do we put them together to make a change happen? It is not just about how do we launch a multi-million-dollar company. So what we need to do at every level is get much better at seeing the feedback loops, which is the thing that systems use to stay in sync. How long does it take for us to see if something is working or not, to get feedback about how the system is pushing back? If we look for those things, we can discover them sooner. So Nintendo, a playing card company, paid enough attention to decide to launch a video game division. But at a much smaller level, if you work for a company that, installs heating and air conditioning, you can now take a look at what's happening with solar power, because sooner or later, your competitors are going to decide to add solar panels to what they do. This is not just a timing question. It's a strategy question. It's a systems question about when is the moment when you can build an asset that your competitors don't have for the people you seek to serve. So as I said before, turtles all the way down to the bottom. Within every strategy question is a smaller strategy question. And it doesn't matter where you are in the organization or if it's in your personal life. Are you looking at time and games and systems with empathy to make the change you seek to make? And your questions have been thrilling and right on. And I'm even happier that I wrote the book now than I was this morning. So thank you.
I love the answers, and this is going to be on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and so on. And there is plenty of room also for the feedback loops. So I would love to, it's a new podcast. I would love to hear also from everyone out there and asking questions, giving feedback. But most of all, Seth Godin, thanks so much for prioritizing in your busy schedule to join this up and coming podcast. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. Keep making a ruckus. We need you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Extraordinary. Remember to subscribe to our channel to get notifications when a new episode goes live. Also visit www.extraordinary.media and sign up for our weekly newsletter so you never miss a new and inspiring episode. We wish you an extraordinary day.